Okay, we're going to continue our conversation about types of lines. Our third type is called point slope form. And in the point slope form, it looks like this. Y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. And again, I'm going to put our original y equals mx plus b up here for you to compare. And again, this is called slope-intercept. So if we were to make some comparisons here, we would notice that each of them have a slope in it. All right, you can see the m here and the m here. You can see the word slope in each of their names. Some other similarities would be they both have a y in them and they both have an x in them. So the difference here would be this one has a b, and again, that is the y-intercept. And this one has an x1 and a y1, right? Hopefully you remember from our work with slope that x1, y1 stands for the x1, the x coordinate of our ordered pair and the y coordinate of our ordered pair. So if we look at this right here, this b stands for the y-intercept. This x1, y1 stands for a point, and it's a point that is generally not the y-intercept. All right, so this would be some random point like 7, 3 or -1/2, -2 or something, right? So it's just some random point. So that is the main difference as to when we would use slope-intercept form and when we would use point slope form. This one, if we're writing equations, we're going to use it if we know the y-intercept, and this one we're going to use it if we don't know the y-intercept, if we just know some random point, right? So let's see, if we were to do y minus 3 equals -3/4 times x minus 4. First of all, I want to point out to you that this minus sign is part of that form, the point slope form. So that means that this y coordinate is just the y1. It's not the sign in front of it, right? Because that is part of the equation right here. This x1 is the x coordinate, not the minus sign. So we'll look at one later where we have plus signs in here and have to rewrite it so that it is in this form to get the correct x and y intercepts. But for right now, I'm just giving you one that's very similar to this. So when we talk about the x coordinate, it's that. And when you talk about the y coordinate, it's that. This is the minus sign that's part of the formula. This is the minus sign that's part of the formula. Okay, so if we were to graph this, we would say that the slope is this value right here, -3/4, and the point that we know is 4, 3. So if we were to graph this, so first thing I would do is I would go to the point 4, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3 up here, and that would be where I would put my first point. Again, normally when we do it in this form, we put our first point at the y, on the y-intercept, on the y-axis. Right, but here, this is the point that we know. It is not the y-intercept, it's just some, seemingly random point. All right, and from there, we're going to use the slope to get to the next point on the line. So this says go down 3/4. So from here I'm going to go down 3, 1, 2, 3, and then over 4. I need to extend this. So over 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so that would be the next point. I could also say, well, if I were to work backwards, again, I go down over and then over to the right, 1, 2, 3, 4. I could go backwards and say go to the left 4. That would take me right here, and up 3, 1, 2, 3. That would give me another point on the line. And so you could just draw that like that. All right, now suppose I give you this. And I say, what is a point on this line? Or what is the point that's given to us here? Think about that for a second. Again, remembering that the minuses should be part of the formula, and if they're not, we have to accommodate that. Well, so hopefully you could see that we could rewrite this as y minus a negative 2 equals 1/2 x minus 6. Right, so then that puts a negative sign back in, or a subtraction sign back in there, and that would make our y coordinate negative 2. And then this already has the minus sign built in, so it's just 6. I think an easier way to remember this is just whatever the sign is in front of that number, your coordinate is always going to be the opposite sign. So this looks like a negative 6, therefore when we put it in here it's a positive 6. This looks like a positive 2, when we put it in that ordered pair it's going to be negative 2. Okay, we're going to practice a lot of these, but I just want to kind of give you an overview of these. So again, I said that there would be times that we would want to write an equation and times that we would want to graph. So I just want to kind of summarize here. So the first one we talked about is slope-intercept. And the two things that we would use it for are graphing. We get the equation and we have to graph it. And then the other one would be either we would get a graph or we would get some information about it and we would have to say what the equation is. So I'm just going to write a yes or a no that goes along with each of these. All right, so slope-intercept form, point-slope form, and standard form. So would we take this and graph from it? Yes, usually we would graph from it. Is somebody going to give us something like this and ask us to graph it? Generally, no. Could we? Yes, but generally they won't. So I'm going to put an X here, is that we're not usually going to be given a line in point slope form and asked to graph it, right? We will be given a line in slope-intercept and asked to graph it. And also we will be given a line in standard form and asked to graph it. But while this is possible to graph in point-slope form, and really quite easy, as you just saw right here, it's not common that they're going to give us an equation in point-slope form and graph it. Right? So I'm just going to put an X, but it's possible. So let's put possible. Okay. Then the other option would be they would either give us a picture of the graph, or they would give us information about the equation and ask us to write the equation. Would we ever want to put it in, or would we ever want to use slope-intercept form to do that? Absolutely. Right? Because they might give us the point, they might give us the y-intercept, and they might give us the slope, and then it's going to be super easy to just write it in that form. Would we want to write an equation in point-slope form? Yes, because they could give us the slope and give us some random point, and then yes, we would be able to easily write the equation. Would we want to write the equation using standard form? And this would be a no. Again, the a, b, and c of the standard form, the ax plus by equals c, they don't really stand for anything like slope or the coordinates of a point. So to put an equation in this standard form right off the bat would be kind of a pain in the neck. All right. So let me just summarize that. If you were asked to write an equation, and I feel like I'm jumping the gun a little bit. We're going to see all this in just a little bit. If you are asked to write an equation of a line, use point slope or slope intercept. So slope intercept or point slope. And again, this one you're going to use if you know the slope and the y-intercept. And this one you're going to use if you know the slope and you know some non-y-intercept point. All right, and again, here's one other question I want to ask you. How do you know when you have the y-intercept? How do you know when a point is the y-intercept? All right, so let's look at a graph. So let's say I gave you this line right here, and I said, where's the y-intercept? Hopefully you're at home saying, go to that point right there. Hopefully you're pointing to that one right here. And let's say it were this were 1 and that were 2. So what would the coordinates of that point be? Hopefully you said 0, 2. All right, what happens if I gave you this one? All right, where's the y-intercept? Hopefully you're saying down here. What are the coordinates? Hopefully you said 0, -4. Right. Suppose I gave you this line right here and said, what's the y-intercept? You would say that. And then what's the what's the ordered pair? That would be 0, -1. What do you notice about all of these y-intercepts? Hopefully you realize that the x-coordinate is always 0. So how do you know when a point is the y-intercept? It's always in this form, 0, comma, some number. Right? So the x-coordinate will always be 0. Right? Don't get confused with somebody that gives you this point like 7, 0. That is not the y-intercept because the x-coordinate is not 0. The y-coordinate is 0. So this would be the x-intercept. So when we are asking about whether we have a random point or whether we have the y-intercept, we're always talking about a point that's in that form, 0, comma, some number. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next video because in that we're going to practice graphing things that are in y = mx + b or slope-intercept form. I'll see you back in a minute.